Welcome back to our channel. But don't scroll away, because what you're about to hear is not just a business success. This is a story of war, pain, and survival. A story of one man who had nothing, no freedom, no money, no power. And yet, he built something that helped rebuild an entire country. This is the real story of Samsung. The year was 1938. The world was full of fear and change. In a small part of Asia, Korea was not yet free. People lived under control, not choice. They walked in silence, stood in lines, and worked hard just to stay alive. In one small town, a man named Lee Byung-chul had a dream. He was not rich. He didn't own land. He had no big machines, no foreign investors, no team. But he had a small idea and a big reason. He wanted to do something meaningful, not for the world, not for money, but for his people. He started a trading store. It was simple. He sold dry fish, noodles, sugar, and small everyday goods. The shop was tiny, only a few workers, no fancy boards, no logo, just hope. He gave it a name, Samsung, which means 3 stars. To him, it meant something strong, something lasting, something that would shine even when times were dark. He didn't open that shop to become famous. He opened it because his country needed something to believe in. But the pain was not over. In the early 1950s, war broke out. The Korean War destroyed everything. Cities were bombed. Families were torn apart. Fire and fear filled the streets. And that little shop, Samsung, was lost in the smoke. Lee stood in the middle of nothing. His shop was gone. His workers were gone. His country was bleeding. Everything he built was taken away in seconds. Most people would have given up. But Lee did not. He started again, slowly, carefully, with no noise. He opened a new office in another part of Korea. This time, he didn't dream of stars. He dreamed of survival. He made sugar, cloth, paper, and soap, anything that could help people live. There were no computers, no electronics, no big dreams, just one goal: help rebuild the country. Samsung became useful, not famous. It became part of the daily life of poor families. Lee gave jobs to people who had lost everything. He trained them with patience. He treated them like family. And in return, they worked with loyalty. Samsung didn't grow fast, but it grew strong. Lee was not thinking about the future of phones. He was thinking about the future of Korea. He knew that if his people had jobs, they could feed their children. If they had hope, they would not leave. If they had something to hold on to, they would not fall again. Samsung became more than a business. It became a symbol of hope, of rebuilding, of strength. The government saw this. The people saw this. And slowly, Samsung became part of the country's new life. But Lee was not finished. He had survived war. He had rebuilt his dream. And now, he wanted to go further. He looked at the world and saw machines, radios, and new ideas. He asked himself a question. If other countries can build the future, why not us? That one question changed everything. Because now, Samsung was no longer just a shop. It was about to become a dream factory. That next step will take us into a world of challenges, doubts, and bold decisions. But before we go there, let's stop and remember something simple. Samsung didn't start with screens. It didn't start with chips. It started with pain, with loss, with nothing. But it also started with one man's choice to try again when everything told him not to. Lee Byung-chul had already survived the worst. He had seen his shop burn. He had seen his workers disappear. He had seen war turn his country into ruins. But he had also seen what belief could do. He had restarted Samsung with nothing and turned it into a growing business. He had helped people work again. He had helped families eat again. But deep inside, he knew one thing: survival was not enough. It was time to dream bigger. By the 1960s, Korea was trying to build a future. The roads were rough, the economy was weak, but a fire was beginning to rise in some hearts. People no longer wanted to copy the world. They wanted to compete with it. And Lee was one of those people. He started thinking about the next step: machines, electronics, science, things that sounded too big for a country still healing from war. But Lee had a habit of asking bold questions, and this time he asked, why not us? In the late 1960s, Samsung entered the world of electronics. They made their first black and white TV. It was simple, heavy, and slow. But for Korea, it was magic. For the first time, families could watch news and shows in their homes. People gathered around the small screens and smiled. It wasn't about the TV. It was about the pride. Samsung had done something many thought was impossible. They had created a piece of the future. But the road was not easy. In fact, it was full of doubt. Many people said Korean products were weak, that they were just cheap copies. The world didn't take Samsung seriously. Their electronics were slow, their designs were old, their quality was poor. But Lee didn't stop. He kept building. Every failure became a lesson. Every insult became fuel. And one thing kept him going: the belief that Korea had the right to stand next to giants. As the 1970s came, Samsung built more factories. They made radios, washing machines, and refrigerators. Most of them were not perfect, but they were improving, slowly, day by day. Samsung was learning, and with new product, they were not just selling, they were shaping the future of Korean industry. Jobs were growing, confidence was rising. A country once known for rice and paper was now producing machines. Then came the 1980s, and with it came a new challenge. The world was moving toward chips, small, smart, and powerful pieces that could run machines, computers, and later phones. Chips were the heart of modern electronics. At that time, very few countries made them, and Samsung had never even tried. But once again, Lee asked, why not us? That one question took Samsung into a new era, an era of technology, risk, and massive change. By the time Samsung started making chips, Lee was getting old, but his spirit was still young. His company was growing, but his dream was growing faster. He wanted Samsung to become global. He wanted Korea to become strong. But deep down, he knew his time was short. So in 1987, Lee passed away. His son, Lee Kun-hee, took over. Lee Kun-hee was not like his father. He was quiet, serious, and focused. But one thing was the same. He had belief. And he had a vision. He looked at Samsung and said something no one expected. Change everything, except your wife and children. That was his message to the company. He didn't want small change. He wanted transformation. Under his leadership, Samsung began a bold journey. They started redesigning their products. They focused on quality. They studied the world's best companies. They trained their people again and again. The goal was clear: make Samsung respected, not just accepted. And slowly, the world began to notice. By the early 1990s, Samsung was no longer just a Korean company. It was entering international markets. It was improving its phones, TVs, and chips. It was learning fast. It was not perfect, but it was determined. The world had called Samsung weak. Now, they were paying attention. This part of the story is not about success yet. It is about courage, about moving from comfort into challenge, about building things when the world laughs at you, about changing not just products, but mindset. Samsung was no longer trying to survive. It was trying to lead. The next chapter will show how Samsung took that leadership and entered a war, not with weapons, but with design, technology, and belief. A war of brands, where the enemy was not poverty, but doubt. And Samsung had only one mission: to prove that a company born in broken streets could become a global giant. The world was changing fast. Technology was no longer a dream. It had become a war of design, a war of speed, a war of ideas. Big brands were growing everywhere, in America, in Japan, in Europe. And in the middle of this global race stood Samsung, not as a winner, not yet, but as a quiet fighter, a fighter with a reason to rise. After his father's death, Lee Kun-hee became the new leader of Samsung. He saw something others did not. He saw that Samsung was working hard, but not smart. It was producing more, but not better. It was growing big, but not respected. One day, while walking through an electronics store in Los Angeles, he noticed something strange. His own company's TVs were sitting in the back. The front shelves were full of Japanese brands. That moment hit him like a storm. He said to himself, "If we don't change now, we will never be great." He returned to Korea and made a speech that shook the company. In front of his top people, he said, "Change everything, except your wife and kids." It was not just a line. It was a message. He wanted to break the old system. He wanted a new Samsung, bold, brave, and better. And so began the global battle. Samsung shut down weak factories. It threw away thousands of poor quality products. It spent millions on retraining staff. The company started sending engineers to study in the US, in Germany, in Japan. They didn't go there to copy. They went to understand. Lee wanted Samsung to be respected like Sony, like Apple, like the biggest names in the world. And he knew respect doesn't come cheap. In 1995, something happened that showed how serious he was. A large number of phones were found to have problems. They were not dangerous, but they were not perfect. Many companies would have sold them anyway, but Lee made a different choice. In front of 2,000 employees, he ordered all the phones to be burned. Not just thrown away, burned. With fire. Millions of dollars were lost. But trust was gained. He wanted everyone to see quality matters more than money. Slowly, things began to change. Samsung phones started to feel better. Their TVs looked sharper. Their fridges ran longer. People around the world started noticing. "This is not the same Samsung," they said. And they were right. Samsung had entered the real game, the global game. But success never comes easy. In the 2000s, smartphones became the new battlefield, and leading that war was Apple. Sleek, stylish, smart. The iPhone changed everything. And once again, people looked at Samsung and asked, can they survive this? At first, Samsung was far behind. Their phones were big, slow, and boring. People made jokes. Critics laughed. But Samsung did not stop. They worked harder. They studied what users needed. And they started building phones that didn't copy. They created. By 2010, Samsung launched the Galaxy series. It was fast. It was clean. It gave users something different. People loved it. And for the first time, Samsung became a serious challenger to Apple, not just in Asia, but in the US, Europe, and beyond. The war had started. Samsung versus Apple. Ads were bold. Courts were filled with lawsuits. The world watched as two giants fought for the future. But deep inside Samsung's walls, the message was clear. Don't chase others. Lead your own way. And that's what they did. Samsung built their own chips, their own screens, their own identity. They invested in R&D like never before. They created phones that folded, cameras that amazed, and designs that spoke style. And even when they failed, like with the Note 7 battery issue, they took full responsibility. They learned. They rebuilt. And they came back stronger. By the late 2010s, Samsung was no longer the quiet company from Korea. It was the #1 smartphone brand in the world. It was making chips for other giants. It was setting trends, not following them. It had earned not just market share, but respect. The kind of respect Lee Kun-hee had dreamed of when he asked for everything to change. But this part of the story is not just about phones or products. It is about belief, about facing giants without fear, about making bold choices when silence feels safer, about burning what is broken so that something better can be born. Samsung didn't win this global battle by chance. It won because it refused to stay small. It refused to stay in the shadows. It stood up, spoke up, and showed the world that even a company born in pain can lead in power. The next chapter will take us even deeper, into a time when Samsung not only won markets, but started changing lives, with technology, with vision, with purpose. Because for Samsung, the goal was never just to sell. The goal was always to serve. It had built phones that people loved, TVs that lit up millions of homes, chips that powered other giants. But inside the company, something even bigger was growing, a sense of purpose. It was no longer just about business. It was about people, about life, about making a real difference. After years of struggle, Samsung became a name the world trusted. From the US to India, from Africa to Europe, people were using Samsung products every day. But Samsung wanted to do more. It wanted to give more. In poor villages, it helped schools with smart devices. In disaster zones, it sent medical support and tech help. It opened learning centers. It built programs to train young people. It created jobs where there was nothing before. Because for Samsung, success had to mean something more. Inside the company, the culture was clear. Respect the worker, not just the result. Engineers were treated with care. Factory workers were given better safety. Young talents were supported. Samsung didn't want to just grow alone. It wanted to lift others along the way. And all of this started from one belief, that technology should be used to help humanity, not just to sell to it. Over the years, Samsung moved into healthcare, AI, space research, and smart homes. It connected homes, saved energy, and built machines that made life easier. And it kept pushing limits. Foldable phones, powerful chips, deep learning tools. Samsung was not chasing attention. It was chasing progress. And that's what made it different. In 2020, something happened that shook the world. The leader who changed everything, Lee Kun-hee, passed away. The man who once said, "Change everything except your wife and children," had left behind a legacy so strong that it would guide the company for decades. He took Samsung from a struggling electronics company to a global icon, not just with strategy, but with heart. And now, as Samsung moves forward with new leadership and new dreams, one thing remains the same. Its soul. The soul of a company that rose from war, stood through shame, burned its own products for truth, and came back stronger every time. A company that touched lives not just through screens, but through service, sacrifice, and purpose. Today, Samsung is more than a brand. It's a habit, a feeling, a part of everyday life. It's in your pocket, in your home, in your heart. And if you look closely, it's also in your hope. Hope that no matter how small you start, how big the world is, or how many times you fall, you can still rise. You can still lead. You can still change lives. So, what can you learn from Samsung's journey? 1. Your beginnings don't define your future. Samsung started with sugar and fish, not chips and phones. 2. You don't need to be the best to begin. You just need to begin. 3. Mistakes don't break you. They make you. 4. Building something meaningful takes time, courage, and belief. And 5. If you care for people, the world will care for your dream. Samsung was not built in a lab. It was built in silence, in struggle, in sacrifice. From a broken street in a broken country came a brand that now powers more than 1 billion lives. And maybe, just maybe, you have a Samsung inside you too. A small dream, a quiet fire, a reason not to give up. So don't wait. Don't stop. Because your dream matters. And remember, this was not just a business story. This was a life story. Thank you for watching. Thank you for dreaming. And thank you for believing.